Welcome to Doll Talk with Savvy. Today, we have another exclusive interview with a New York Times best-selling author. Hello everyone, I'm Doll Savvy, and I'm here today with another special author guest. Today's guest is not our usual Darlene Hoover, but instead a new addition to our show. Everybody please say hello to Rachel Dollis! Hey everybody! Now Rachel, you have a new book that just came out earlier this month called What If You Are the Answer? In the past, your books have had a pattern of starting with the word girl, like your previous best-selling books Girl Wash Your Face and Girl Stop Apologizing. Why did you choose to forego the girl at the start of this title? Well, I figured we're all getting older and maturing, and I'm not really a girl anymore. As I like to say, I'm not a girl, not yet a woman. Are you quoting Britney Spears? No, I came up with that quote myself. Are you sure? Because I'm pretty sure No, I come up with all my own quotes myself. What about Still I Rise? That whole thing was taken out of context. Sure, Maya Angelou technically said Still I Rise first, but I wasn't talking about rising out of hardship metaphorically. I was speaking literally, talking from the perspective of the sourdough bread I was baking. It was during the COVID pandemic. Everyone was baking bread back then, and my audience kept asking me if they should knead their bread dough more or just let it sit still. So from the point of view of the bread dough, I explained to leave me alone because I rise when I'm still. Still, I rise. Good to know. So can we expect a lot more brilliantly original quotes in this new book? Oh, absolutely. See, this book is about overcoming fear to be the best version of yourself. As I always like to say, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. Wait, didn't a president say that? Maybe Roosevelt? I don't know. He probably said a lot of things. He was president after all, but he died years before I was born, so it's not like I got to meet him. Sometimes great minds just think alike. All right then, one more question for you, Rachel. I heard that this book talks about one of your relatives who's chronically ill and you give advice for how to feel better physically. This is advice that I personally need right now. 3 days into 2025, I got a nasty case of COVID, and then once I got over COVID, my scoliosis had a bad flare-up and I couldn't sit down, so I was confined to the couch for a week, taking nasty medications that made me exhausted, bloated, and dehydrated. I seem to keep getting sick, and I can't seem to escape these lifelong disabilities. Do you have any advice for me, Dr. Dollis? Yes, it's all about manifestation. You're subconsciously manifesting your own disabilities. I am? Yes. See, we only experience what we manifest. Manifest? Well, I guess for you, it would be womanifest. For me, it would be not a girl, not yet a womanifest. Thank you for your time, Rachel Dollis. Everybody get ready to dive deep into Miss Dollis's newest book, What If You Are the Answer? We're recording standing up today, friends. I can't sit down right now. The scoliosis is having problems. What a great way to start 2025, am I right? Now, let's hear it for our newest doll actor, Marie Grace. Rachel Dollis was played by the lovely Marie Grace Palmer. Now, if you are a big-time American Girl doll fan, you're probably like, wait, isn't her name actually Marie Grace Gardner? Canonically, yes it is, but for my own dolls, for her specifically, I changed it. Why? Because, Darlene Hoover right there, she made me change her name to Marie Grace Palmer so that it would sound more like her favorite thing, marine grade polymer. They're all like, who killed Laura Palmer? More like, who beats up a chair made of marine grade polymer? That's Colleen Hoover, or Darlene Hoover for you. I swear, these dolls, they all get more and more demanding every day. It's only a matter of time before the whole unpaid intern squad starts unionizing on me. Alright, this video might seem a little bit paradoxical at first. Rachel Hollis's new book, which is called What If You Are the Answer, is by far the worst book of hers that I've ever read, and I think this is number 5 of her books now, but at the same time, it has the most inklings of her potential, like, sprinkled in there, and in those moments, I become genuinely a little concerned for her. My aim in this book review is for both my praise and my criticism of this new book to come from a place of compassion rather than a place of snark. This is also the first and only video that I have ever made about Rachel Hollis where I can genuinely say that I hope she sees this. I'm not going to send this video to her. I'm not going to tag her in it. In the book review community, it is considered extremely bad form to tag an author in a review that is largely negative and critical, or to send that to an author. So I'm also asking, please, that none of you send this to her or tag her in it either. I'm serious about that. I agree with my friend Reads with Rachel on this one, that author and reviewer communities do need to have a little bit of separation. Reviewers shouldn't be giving their critiques to authors to their face, and authors shouldn't be coming after reviewers when they disagree with their opinion. We need to keep those things separate. That being said, this book has a huge glaring red flag in it, and it's something that I'm not sure Rachel Hollis has even realized about herself yet. This is an entire book that she wrote about finding answers within yourself and working past your fears to achieve your dreams, and yet in this book, she makes it so abundantly clear that she is avoiding her own true passion and her own true dreams in favor of playing it safe within the self-help sphere where she's had past success. Part of me thinks she just legitimately has not realized this yet and that she needs a wake-up call. Of course, it's also possible that she's just lying to me and that this book, like everything else, is just another girl boss grift, but I am going to approach this review assuming good intentions on Rachel's part. This book has done more than any other book of hers I've read to show me how incredible Rachel's potential as a writer truly is, and also how badly she's squandering it. And I personally find that tragic. I think it's because she herself is just as afraid of change as the people she's coaching. I think she is talking to herself, targeting this book at herself, and I'm going to break down what I mean by that. So we're going to talk today about Rachel Hollis's new book that just came out, released earlier this month, called What If You Are the Answer?
Get you some nuts.
Yeah, you effing.
Up yours, woke moralist. We'll see who cancels who.
Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to my channel. I'm Savvy. This is Savvy Writes Books. On this channel, we do book reviews, media analysis, and video essays about a variety of topics. So if you are interested in any of that, please click the subscribe button. I am getting so close to 100,000 subscribers right now that it's really, really exciting. And I've told my audience that when I hit that milestone of 100,000 subscribers, I'm going to finally review the book After by Anna Todd, the book that was Harry Styles fanfiction that then got published as a novel that then became a Netflix movie. This book sounds like a wild ride. So if you want to see me review that monstrosity, then please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. This video does not have a sponsor, so instead I would like to take this time to thank my Patreon supporters. Their names are up on the screen. If you are interested in getting some behind the scenes content, additional blog posts, occasionally bonus videos and things like that, go ahead and check out my Patreon page, which is linked in the description below. Top tier patrons can link their own stuff in my description below, so check that out as well. And don't forget, please do follow me on Instagram if you haven't already, because if you can see all this jewelry that I've been making and I've been wearing, I am going to be doing some book releases coming up in the next few months, and as part of promotion for those, I'm going to be doing handmade jewelry giveaways, so if you're interested in potentially winning some jewelry from me, make sure you are following me on Instagram. My handle's up on the screen and linked in the description below. One more thing! You like this dress? Look at this beautiful dress I'm wearing. If you like it, it is my own merch featuring my own original art. If you're interested in merch from me, check out my shop, hipsterunicorn.myshopify.com, linked in the description below. You can see my OC American Girl doll, Charlotte, over here is wearing one of the designs. We don't actually have doll clothes available yet, but if you like my original art, you can check out that merch as well. Now let's get back into our topic. So if you've been a long time viewer of my channel, then you've probably seen me review a lot of Rachel Hollis's other books on this channel, including Girl Wash Your Face was the big one, which I think I did like 6 years ago now. That's wild. I reviewed Girl Stop Apologizing back in 2019. I reviewed Didn't See That Coming back in 2020. And plus, I've also talked about her fiction novels, including her book Party Girl, in a video essay that I made, I think 2019 or so on this channel. It's really interesting and strange to read one of Rachel's books that came out in 2025 simply because the world is not what it was back in 2018. In 2018, Rachel was the queen of the boss babes, and that was in part because the 2010s were a decade that was dominated by startup culture and hustle culture. It was a decade that framed female empowerment through the same lens as male empowerment, which is, yes, men are out there dominating the majority of our industries and making a lot more money in general, but if women want to earn their place at the table, they should just also subscribe to the same capitalist-informed, hustle culture-driven ideals that men are doing. Men don't need to make themselves better, women need to make themselves worse. That's kind of what the whole boss babe culture of that era was like. But I think that 2020 is when everything had a huge shift, and there's a ton of reasons for this. In 2020, the US was coming out of the first Trump presidency. A lot of us in this country it was really starting to sink in just how much damage one individual person could do to an entire country. And perhaps even bigger than that, 2020 was when we experienced a worldwide pandemic, which not only highlighted the extreme differences in social class, not just in the US, but all over the world, but also really hammered home for a lot of us how little control we actually have over our lives. 2020 was also when we saw a huge surge in the popularity of the Black Lives Matter movement, which woke a lot of people up to the racial divisions that we still have even here in the US, which further cemented the fact that our own personal success is influenced by a lot of factors beyond just how hard we hustle or how hard we pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. Everything about 2020 showed how systemic a lot of the injustices around us really are, which highlighted what a scam the self-help industry really is. Combine that with 2022 and the repeal of Roe versus Wade, a lot of Americans also started to see their success not as something within their own control, but something that came as a product of the sex, gender, race, and social class economically that we're born into. With the world falling apart and a lot of people falling on harder and harder times, the reign of the self-help industry started to dwindle. Self-help influencers can only thrive if people legitimately believe that they're in charge of their own lives. And when a bunch of huge worldwide tragedies hit all at once, there's no amount of waking up early or drinking a gallon of water or meditation or journaling that can put our lives fully back into our own control. Soon, influencers like Rachel Hollis started to become obsolete, and she does still have a fan base. It's likely a bigger following than I'll ever see, but it's nothing at all compared to where she was. If you weren't following girl bosses back in like 2018, 2019, you might not realize it, but Rachel Hollis had an extremely huge hold on the girl boss industry. It's now 2025, meaning it's been almost 3 years since I've covered Rachel on this channel. I think the last video I made that even included her was just my breast reduction vlog, which that video wasn't even about her. I just used some jokes and memes and like references to when in her books she would body shame big titty girls like me just as a bit throughout it, because the video was really just like a vlog of what the surgery was like. Oh, wait, no, actually, I think I reviewed a podcast episode she made about LGBT topics back at some point in 2022 that I think was after that. But that was a positive review. I thought she did a good job on that episode. And anyway, it was in the first half of 2022 regardless. I've just basically avoided anything relating to Rachel Hollis for a few years, and that's for one main reason. She's just not that relevant anymore. And the huge downfall that she experienced during Toiletgate, which if you don't know what that is, I have a whole video on it. I'll link it in the description below. Just don't let my huge boobs jump scare you when you get to that video, okay? But after that controversy, a lot of people stopped trusting Rachel.
What is it about me that made you think I want to be relatable?
They no longer saw her as this regular girl next door, the girl who can give you the advice you need to become wealthy and successful just like her. They now saw Rachel as this woman who talks down to her housekeeper, who doesn't want to be seen as relatable anymore, someone who thinks she's superior to you and also wants you to know it. In 2023, news broke that Rachel Hollis's ex-husband and the father of her children, Dave Hollis, had tragically died of a suspected cocaine overdose at the still pretty young age of 47. And that was another moment where I kind of distanced myself from these people and this whole industry in general. I did have a few people in my audience asking me if I was ever going to talk about Dave and his sudden and tragic death. And at the time, I really didn't want to, and that's for one specific reason. My only connection to Dave and also to Rachel, my only real connection to them was that I gave their books negative reviews, that I'm a book reviewer who criticized them. I don't know them personally. I'm not a friend. I'm not a relative. I've never met these people. This was a family suffering through a tragedy, the likes of which I can only imagine. I just didn't find it necessary or appropriate for myself to comment on it. I was really devastated to hear the news. Honestly, it rattled me. It shook me up a lot more than I think I'll ever be comfortable talking about publicly. But I did choose to avoid talking about it because I was thinking, like, who would that really help? The people who were grieving the most at the time were his kids, and if his kids by chance just stumbled across a video of me making a statement about it, I was like, would they really be that comforted by hearing from someone who didn't know their dad and whose only connection to him was giving his books negative reviews? would they just be weirded out that I inserted myself into this situation at all? It just didn't feel like my place, and I didn't think it was going to do any good. I also do, though, fully understand why people wanted me to talk about it, and I know that a few other creators that I'm friends with did talk about it, and I fully respect that. That's their right. I understand that we all process things a little bit differently. I just personally did not feel comfortable doing so. But now I think things are a little bit different because Rachel has released a new book, and book reviews are my channel's domain. That is the main thing that I do on this channel, so I feel like I do have a lot of valuable things to say right now and to talk about this book. This book at times made me really angry at Rachel, and at other times it made me feel really bad for her, but mostly it solidified what I've known for years. Rachel is by far the best writer of all of these self-help gurus. She has the most writing talent, and it's not even close. And it just makes me sad to see her wasting her potential and her talent by continuing to ride this boss babe train, continuing to pander to an audience that largely dried up at the start of the 2020s. But with all that said, let's get into some of the details of this book. The first thing I noticed in this book is not a big deal. It's just funny to me. If you remember my review of her book, Didn't See That Coming, that I put out like 4 years ago, you may remember that in that book, Rachel mixed up the words perspective and prospective.
She was talking about the process of adoption and adopting a baby. You're meeting with the birth parents. You might be so excited about meeting the new baby that you forget to consider the feelings of the birth parents. And it was actually a good point, and I think it made a lot of sense, and I'm glad she brought it up. But the way she wrote this was, the excited prospective parents are laser focused on the baby. And I was like, so I was already lost, because I was like, at first I was like, the excited perspective. So I'm like, okay, she's talking about the parents have a perspective that is excited. So they're like, the excited prospective parents, and I assume the rest of the sentence would be like, the excited prospective parents will exhibit during this time, might cloud their judgment or something. But she didn't. She said the excited prospective parents are laser focused on the baby. And then it hit me that she meant the word prospective. She just spelled it wrong. It was supposed to be prospective parents, not perspective parents.
Well, let's read page Roman numeral 11 in the introduction. Life has punched me, and I'm sure you too, in the face many times, and in those moments of shock that immediately follow something hard, or the months, okay, but really it's years, of overthinking I do in the aftermath, I often have a prospective shift about whole parts of my worldview. Guys, she mixed them up again, but she did them the opposite way around this time. That's just funny to be like, girl, get an editor, okay? Now we're gonna get on to the actual content of the book, some reviews of substance, okay? Early on in the book, we get all of these very cliche platitudes, like more so than even in her previous books. At times, it kind of feels like she just told ChatGPT to write some girl boss quotes occasionally with like, sometimes through a Buddhist lens if they were feeling it. So we get a lot of things that sound like this. On page Roman numeral 11, again, all I know, all any of us can ever know, is what's real and true for us, in this moment, today. At first I liked this quote because I've actually started studying a lot of Buddhist teachings in the past year, which has been kind of helpful as a way to help myself cope with a lot of the tragedies that I went through in 2024. I do like this type of nothing is permanent attitude. The kind of statement could work well as a thesis for this book, which Rachel could then expand on. She could provide more detailed examples from her own life. She could provide stories from throughout history. She could provide studies to back it up. But instead, this book is just full of more and more of this type of platitude, and starts to feel emptier and emptier the longer the book goes on. On page 2, she says, living life means getting the most out of it that we can, and not in some greedy, selfish, consumeristic kind of way, but in a soak up the goodness all around you, embrace the hard stuff too, fill and feel all the way to the edges of every day kind of way. And the book is just full of more and more of these tired cliches that I started to get a headache just reading it. But in the first few chapters, there were also a few points she made that I found really interesting. For example, on page 6, she says, you don't live once, you die once. And that sounds kind of like a cliche quote, but I think it actually holds a decent amount of power in terms of how we can refocus our lives, how we can think of what it means to have second chances and things like that. But then I Googled the quote, and it turns out that Bobby Darin actually said this quote first. So the quote of hers that I liked wasn't even original, it was once again stolen. Later on page 6, we get this glimpse into Rachel's religious deconstruction. And that's something I found really interesting. When Rachel started out as an influencer, she was focused a lot more on Christianity. She talked multiple times about how her father was a Pentecostal preacher, and she's mentioned all the strict guidelines that she was expected to follow, especially as a young woman when she was growing up in the church. On page 6, she says, and the strict religious culture of my childhood, the focus was almost exclusively on the afterlife. The sermons and lessons I heard weekly from both my father and my grandfather, both fire and brimstone Pentecostal preachers, revolved around how you could live this life in such a way that you'd be guaranteed a beautiful existence after you died. Sometimes when I write about the things I was taught growing up, I feel like I'm writing about an alien planet. This is one of those instances. I really do like these moments in Rachel's writing. So I'm a former Catholic. I know a lot of people who are former Mormons, who are ex-evangelicals, you name it. And a lot of times leaving a religious community can be very difficult, especially when it comes to unlearning a lot of the strict rules that your religion wanted you to take for granted, especially surrounding the role and the expectations of women. I'd love to see Rachel writing more about the inner conflicts that she's had with the girl she was raised to be versus the woman that she now wants to be, how unpacking some of what she learned during her upbringing has contributed to her development. I'd like that. More of this stuff, please. It's interesting. On page 9, she starts the chapter called What Must You Let Go Of, and this was by far my favorite chapter in the book. Every once in a while, Rachel does have really good ideas that legitimately motivate me. So at the start of the chapter, she talks about how she and her friends like to host these monthly gatherings called Vision Quest, where they all meet at someone's house, they cook a huge meal, they do like a potluck-style dinner, they all sit around a table discussing their goals for the month. They give each other advice, and then they help hold each other accountable. I loved this idea. Actually, genuinely, I loved this idea. I really do want to try it. I've always done better at achieving big goals that I have when I have friends along the way with me. And this sounds like a really fun way to encourage each other and get motivated at the start of a new month or a new year, or just when you're setting new goals. I'd love it if Rachel wrote the entire book around this idea, like breaking down the specifics of how she and her friends help each other, what prompts they give each other, what they were able to accomplish, how they broke down their goals, tips for how you can maybe host your own vision quest with friends. I think that would have been a really fantastic book because I love this idea and I actually want to try it. But instead of talking more about that, Rachel just transitions into talking about her yoga instructor who taught her about the astrology behind Scorpio. I don't really know much astrology, but once Rachel learned about Scorpio, then she went online and started researching scorpions. The writing in this section was a little bit cringy, but I also thought it did have some interesting figurative language, so I didn't mind that much. Also, one of my new favorite hobbies last year became doing stoned yoga because stretching feels just incredible after you got some gummies in you, seriously. Anyway, so Rachel starts learning about scorpions, mainly about how they need to shed their entire skin in order to grow. And then partway through the next section, her writing becomes a lot less interesting and goes back to the cliches. On page 15, she says, "I couldn't help but wonder how tight and claustrophobic it must have been, constantly pushing against walls that were unable to expand with her. How long did she try to fit inside the smaller version of herself simply because it was easier? How scary must it have been to decide to evolve knowing the transition would be deeply painful? Why am I crying? And when did I start seeing my story play out in the life cycle of scorpions?" Just wait, it gets even more poignant. The other beautiful lesson that I learned is that when the scorpion finally makes the decision to leave her armor behind, she must live, sometimes for several days, completely vulnerable without any protective coverings. I guess this example's kind of interesting because the figurative language is fun, but the takeaway sounds like another empty feel-good story. The same ones she'd use when she was talking to girl bosses at multi-level marketing conventions like last decade. It definitely fell a bit flat for me because it sounded just like regurgitated boss babe shit over and over again. In the next chapter, we get more of these moments where Rachel really lacks self-awareness. On page 18, she's talking about this concept of knowing your purpose, and she says, "Worse yet, why do you think you're somehow failing as a person because you don't know your purpose? In a word, marketing. Somewhere in the last decade, knowing your purpose became popular, like Regina George popular. It became popular because, Rachel, people like you made it popular. The entire self-help industry made it popular. This is what you built your career on. It was you. My sister in Christ, my sister in religious deconstruction, you are the one who made it popular." And then on the next page, she does more of the same. "In fact, I don't know a single person who set out to find their passion or paid for a course on it or read a book about it who actually achieved the desired result." Isn't that just a self-own? You're the one selling us books and courses about how to improve our lives, and then here, in this very book that you sold us to tell us how to improve our lives, you're saying that it's bullshit that people try to sell you books on how to improve your life? That makes absolutely no sense. On the next page, Rachel continues to lack self-awareness. There's a pattern in this book of her telling stories that illustrate her points, but the stories almost always have to show her as the good guy. When in reality, I think it would be so much more impactful if she talked about a lesson she had to learn, that she messed up and acknowledged her mistakes and how she personally grew as a person from her own faults and acknowledging those when she's always right in every story. it's not that interesting and it just makes her seem really full of herself. So on page 20, she's talking about how she was interviewing a woman for a position at her company, and during the interview, they went out to lunch. The woman that Rachel was interviewing kept talking about how she wants to put more goodness out into the world. She wants to bring more positivity into the world. But then when the server came to their table, this woman acted rude and dismissive to the server, and then Rachel was appalled by this behavior, which led her not to hire this woman. And on the surface, yes, I agree with her. You can't claim, I want to make the world a better place. I want to put more positive energy into the world. And then you turn around and act really rude to people around you, especially people who are trying to do their job. But this story falls flat because Rachel has done this exact same thing. The big example that comes to mind is her infamous TikTok that I mentioned earlier, the one where she refers to her housekeeper as the sweet woman who cleans the toilets.
And I mentioned that there's a sweet woman who comes to my house twice a week and cleans. She's my house cleaner. She cleans the toilets.
And that came after another live stream that Rachel had done talking about how she could clean the toilets and do the dishes and such if she wants to. She could do that just as well as her housekeeper, but she didn't want to waste her time on that because she has bigger talents. No mention of the housekeeper's specialty being her own talent or anything.
But, like, could I do the dishes? Yes. Can I scrub the toilet? Absolutely. Can someone else also, so that I could spend my time doing this live stream, writing a book?
I just personally have a hard time believing Rachel when she talks about the importance of being kind and respectful to service workers when she herself has been absolutely insufferable in the same way in the past. Page 22 is, I think, the most significant page in this book, and I'm going to explain why. It seems like when I read a book, it's often page 22 that is significant. For example, when I made my big gay Star Trek video essay this past summer, I'll link that in the description below if you haven't seen it yet. It's my favorite video I've made ever. But anyway, in that video, I talked about how page 22 is the most important page of the novelization of Star Trek the Motion Picture because it's the page that gives us confirmation that Star Trek's creator, Gene Roddenberry, believed that Kirk and Spock were in a gay relationship. Watch that video if you haven't already. I love that video. Anyway, page 22 in this book is similar in that it's significant. It's the page where Rachel's blind spot becomes glaringly obvious, and that's what's going to kind of tie this whole video together at the end. I find purpose in writing these words for you, though truthfully, I really cannot wait to run out of ideas for a nonfiction book so I can start writing exclusively about warrior fairies or something equally geeky. First of all, not to be rude, but I think Rachel already has run out of ideas for nonfiction books because so much of what's in here is just the exact same material we've read in her other books or heard her say on a stage at a multi-level marketing conference, but that's not what I'm going to focus on here. I just want you guys to keep this quote and this idea of hers about how she wants to write about the warrior fairies. Keep that in mind as we move forward in this review. Like I said years ago when I talked about Rachel's fiction romance novel Party Girl, I think she does really well at writing fiction. She also at the time seemed to actually love doing it based on what she said, and also based on the fact that she wrote 3 books for that series. The books also sold pretty well. They didn't sell anything near what Girl Wash Your Face or Girl Stop Apologizing sold, but the copies did sell within the 6 figures of numbers of books sold. She sold a number that smaller authors like me could only dream about, and the books were well written, they were entertaining, so keep that in mind, okay? We're gonna move on. On page 29, she tells a story about how she cried at a Stevie Nicks concert. And like, honestly, I know you don't want to be relatable, Rachel, but that's relatable, okay? I too have seen Stevie Nicks live. I too have been emotionally changed by the experience. But I want you all to also just keep this story in mind as we go through the rest of the book. I promise the warrior fairies and Stevie Nicks are both going to come back into play when we get to the point that I'm trying to make throughout this entire video, so just stay tuned for that. On page 43, she talks about how much she idolizes Oprah, which is pretty outdated in this day and age. Oprah helped 2 of the biggest pseudoscience grifters of all time, Dr. Phil and Dr. Oz, have a career. And I'm not going to blame Oprah. I'm not going to be like, Oprah, you're the one responsible for these men's faults. I'm not going to be blaming a woman for the bad things that men did. But I also just think most people are beyond worshiping talk show hosts at this point. Also, this is just a personal anecdote, but back in the 80s, my mom was an event planner and she did an event in Chicago that involved Oprah. And she said that Oprah was just really rude and really stuck up and didn't want to talk to any of the peasants. She also worked with Michael Jordan and said he was nice and a very normal guy. Again, I don't have proof of that. That's just a story that my mom told me, so take it or leave it. Rachel then spends a decent portion of this chapter talking about how when she got the chance to speak on Oprah's stage, she told the audience a story about how she once lost a tampon inside of her body and forgot to take it out for weeks, and that Oprah found this story disgusting. I'm gonna be real with you guys. This might be controversial of me to say to you guys, but I have never actually minded the tampon story. I actually kind of like it. Like, I think it's ridiculous that someone would get a tampon lost in their body for that long. But at the same time, I don't mind the fact that Rachel likes to be gross. It's the same thing I enjoy about Stephen King's writing. Stephen King also loves to be really graphic and really gross. I personally am a fan of gross out content. I think it keeps me interested. The shock of it keeps me wanting to read more. That's just me though. That might not be you. I personally don't mind it though. But what I'm not a fan of is just reusing the same content over and over again. Rachel has told this particular story a million times. I think it was also in her other books too. I don't see why she isn't using a new story as an opportunity to give us new information. This personally feels kind of lazy to me. The next chapter of the book though is by far the worst. This is the chapter about manifestation and the law of attraction. Every self-help guru and grifter has tried to sell us on the law of attraction for decades now. So Rachel talks first about how it came from the book The Secret by Rhonda Byrne. I have talked about that book briefly before on this channel. I've never done a dedicated review to it, but the gist of it is Rhonda claims that our brains are putting out frequencies into the universe at all times and that we are magnetically attracting our own circumstances to us. In the book The Secret, Rhonda gives us advice such as, if you want to lose weight, don't hang out with fat people because your fat friends are sending fat frequencies out into the universe and then you're gonna gain weight by being near them. She talks about how everything we do is manifested, even things like being assaulted or enduring a natural disaster, because we're in some way manifesting it, even if we didn't want that thing to happen. By fearing that that thing was going to happen, the universe still attracted it to you. It is complete bullshit. It is extremely ableist. It relies on so much victim blaming. I honestly think that The Secret by Rhonda Byrne is probably the worst thing to happen to the personal development world since, like, the invention of snake oil. On page 56, Rachel talks about how she manifested getting an internship at Miramax Films when she was just 18 years old, and even notes that it was, quote, one of the hardest gigs to land. But she never tells us how she landed this gig. Rachel, how did you apply? Whom did you interview with? What connections did you make? That would actually be helpful information, especially for young people who might want to work in the very competitive and cutthroat entertainment industry. But no, she just wants us to think she manifested it, I guess. On page 57, she explains it like this. Energetically, each and every one of us functions at different levels of vibrational output. This part isn't woo-woo hippie stuff. I'll get to that in a minute. This is quantum physics. We're all putting out different levels of vibrational energy, and I don't care how much you buy into this or not. You have to admit that you've experienced this yourself. I just wrote in the comments, no, I have autism. I'm not good at judging anything based on vibes. It was only a couple years ago when I was like about to turn 30 that I learned that the concept of gut feelings, that they're actually a real thing that people really experience. Before that, I just thought it was an expression. I thought people were making this up. Neurotypical friends out there, let me know if you've ever experienced what Rachel is talking about here. I legitimately have not. However, it's page 59 that is, in my opinion, the most disgusting and offensive page in this entire book. Rachel starts off by telling us about this relative she has who's always feeling sick. She says, the energy, vibration, and focus of her mind, body, and spirit has been set to illness for decades. She has long since decided that she's cursed with a bad immune system and destined for a life of disease. I genuinely worry that each medical anomaly will continue to grow in severity until she attracts something that will kill her. There is nothing more powerful than the thoughts we think and the energy we attach to them. All she focuses on is sickness, and since our minds tell our body what is real, I'm positive she is actively weakening her immune system. Couple that with the fact that the message she sends to the universe is, I don't want to get sick, I don't want to get sick, I don't want to get sick. The universe, however, is only responding to her vibrational energy and her focus. The universe doesn't hear, I don't want to, it feels the vibration of her fear and worry, very low level vibrations to attract, and it gets the focus of her attention. Sick, sick, sick. Or maybe, Rachel, have you considered that this person might just have a chronic illness? Chronic illnesses are notoriously hard to diagnose, and for decades they went ignored, especially in women, because many doctors don't take women's health concerns seriously, and historically a lot of medicine was studied with a man as the default human. I've experienced this, my mom has experienced this, so many women I know have experienced this when you're constantly having these health problems and it takes years to figure out why or what you can do about it because your doctor assumes like, oh, she's probably just being hysterical and melodramatic, she's probably just panicking and having an emotional response. That's how women are, you know? I legitimately cannot believe that Rachel typed out this story and that her publisher read this story and everyone involved in the production of this book decided to include it in a finished piece of literature for sale. That is one of the grossest things I have ever read in a self-help book. It's not the grossest. It takes the silver medal. If you were curious, the gold medal goes, of course, to Jen Sincero's book, The Straight Girl's Guide to Sleeping with Chicks, in which she encourages women to sexually harass each other in the locker room, encourages bisexual women to settle down with a man instead of a woman, because men are more likely to pressure you into sex when you don't want it, and women are more likely to be nice and not pressure you into sex, but so you should choose the man. It's good that he's pressuring you into sex, because it means you'll have more sex. I'll link my review of that book below if you haven't seen it yet. It's a wild ride. Just once again, try not to get jump scared by the huge boobs I had 4 years ago. I do legitimately, though, have something positive to say. We're going to change it up now. On page 64, I thought Rachel's writing was legitimately entertaining and funny. She says, "The internet will find a reason to disapprove of anything, of everything, of what you said, or what it thinks you said, or maybe what you didn't say enough of." I know this sounds like a cope on her part, but as a YouTuber, I have experienced this multiple times with people just like straight up lying about me on the internet. It's very frustrating. Anyway, you post about how you just signed up for your first half marathon and lots of friends and family celebrate you, but then there's a couple of comments. Your mother-in-law passive-aggressively drops in, "This new generation of women with its me time is just so different. We never would have pursued that with a family to raise." Next, it's Stephanie, a girl you went to high school with. She adds on, "Oh, I'd love to do something like that, but my priorities are always going to be my children and family, hashtag mom life. Never mind that when you last saw Steph, she was wearing a Limp Bizkit t-shirt and smoking chronic out of an apple." That's what I'm talking about, Rachel! That's funny, Rachel! When you write like this, with that specificity, with that snark in your tone, it's funny! Take this as another example of Rachel's potential as a writer, which we're gonna break down in a bit. Page 72 is similar in this regard. In this chapter, she's talking about how she had a panic attack at a Paul McCartney concert, and the way she writes about the experience is so vivid. She calls it, "My personal downfall, accompanied by a jaunty rendition of Obla-dee Obla-da." Then she says, "I worry that someone in that line might recognize me. Is that Rachel Hollis? I guess the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. La la, how their life goes on." This is a pattern we're going to see more and more of throughout the book, Rachel using music and song lyrics as a motif and a repetitive device to show how her emotions change throughout a situation. I love this literary technique when it's used in poetry, when authors use it in prose, especially in a piece of memoir writing. I think it can make a story very memorable and really show the development of someone's arc. So then back to the story, when her boyfriend, who I think is now her husband, he came to check on her during the panic attack, she says, "He kept asking me questions, but I no longer understood English. I'm a caveman, remember? He was Charlie Brown's teacher. Wah, 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 wah. I had zero idea what he was asking me. Then everything in my entire body sped up and sort of shut down all at once." I think this description of the physicality of a panic attack is very good. It's really vivid, it's really detailed, and she does a good job of inserting humor into a very stressful situation. It's stories like this that exemplify Rachel's personal voice as a writer, a voice that manages to just disappear when she falls back into spouting random self-help cliches devoid of meaning. But in moments like this, I can see her voice coming through, and it reminds me why I sometimes enjoyed her writing in the first place. I also liked page 88. On this page, Rachel talks about trying new things and being bad at them. She says, "I learned to play guitar and write music. I'm pretty terrible at those too, but damn, I went ahead and did it anyway." I like this. I have this beaded bracelet I'm wearing on my wrist right now that I made that says "make bad art." I think there's this stigma that a lot of people have against learning new skills or starting new hobbies once you're too old. I really hate that mindset. When I was a kid, I was physically disabled. I still am as an adult, but I'm capable of doing more things now. And even though I lacked any athletic ability as a kid, that isn't stopping me from the fact that I'm now training in weightlifting. I'm training to start competing in powerlifting, and I didn't start that until my 30s. I didn't get into fashion at all until I was 29, mainly because of my aforementioned huge boobs and the resulting body dysmorphia. Now that I feel at home in my body, now that I like how I look, I've learned to love fashion. I've learned to love making jewelry. I've learned to love the artistry of this. I'm starting to learn new skills like sewing. I'm not that good at any of these things yet, but I'm enjoying learning them, even though they're not part of like any future career plans I have. They're just things that I as a human enjoy doing. So yeah, make bad art. You don't have to be the best at your hobby. You just have to enjoy doing it. And I think this hustle culture driven world could really use that reminder. But also, Rachel taking a moment of reflection to acknowledge how much she personally did to spread that hustle culture mentality. That could really do her some good. That might be a good start. On page 89, she just confused the shit out of me again. She talks about how we sometimes hold ourselves back because of imaginary fears, because of anxieties that we have that aren't based on anything real. She says, imaginary fear. This is the kind of fear we create by dreaming up what might happen. This includes anything you've never done, places you've never gone, conversations you've never had, and people you don't know. And my neurodivergent ass was once again confused. Earlier, Rachel was telling me about gut feelings and vibrations and how I have to trust my gut and trust the vibes, but now she's telling me that sometimes the vibes are wrong because we're just anxious about a threat that isn't actually present. How do I know which situation I'm in at the time? She never tells me. To the way my brain interprets it, it seems to directly contradict itself, but there might be some nuance that I'm missing there. I don't know. On page 104, her lack of self-awareness is just back with a vengeance. She's talking about making the decision to get a divorce after 16 years of marriage with Dave, and she says, I didn't know it at the time, but I wouldn't just be changing my life. I'd be changing my career, my community, and the nature of the work I do. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine the backlash for that decision. The 14 years of work I'd put in as an entrepreneur had been quickly eaten up by a brand made much more palatable when I did that work alongside a man. Being a good wife was the public preference, and when I chose to stop being that, I was no longer acceptable to some. Alright, Rachel, at this point it's just willful ignorance, okay? Maybe it's possible that Rachel had some fans out there that got mad because she wasn't a married woman anymore, because she was no longer fulfilling her divine feminine role properly or whatever, but the overwhelming majority of fans who were mad about the divorce were mad because they felt scammed. Let's not forget that back in 2017, Rachel and Dave, who were, by their own admission, already having marital problems at that point and hiding them from their audience, they hosted a huge marriage counseling conference where they charged 4 figures for tickets so that people could listen to them lead workshops and give lectures on how to have an exceptional marriage based only on their experiences of having been married for a long time. They admitted they don't have any license to do this. I don't think they hired any licensed marriage therapists. The only credential they had was being married a long time and letting people think that they want a marriage like theirs. So when they got divorced, a lot of people felt bamboozled. They felt like they'd wasted all that money on people who were lying to them about their fake credentials. That's why your fans were mad when you got divorced. I'm not sure who she's trying to fool here. Most people who got mad at the divorce remember exactly why they were mad. But that's enough of those type of criticisms. I need to get back to the big picture here, okay? We need to get back to page 22, back to the Warrior Fairies, and back to Stevie Nicks. But real quick first, we do need to go forward. We need to go on to page 134. On this page, Rachel is talking about the process of dating after divorce and how she's been seeing this new guy named Kez, I think, who I also think is now her husband. I think they got married. On this page, she's discussing their first kiss after they'd first started seeing each other and hanging out for a bit. Here's how she describes it. Was I wheezing? Maybe. Was I sweating through my clothes? Most definitely. And what? What did I, successful, highly accomplished, wildly confident badass that I am, what did I do when this beautiful man started kissing me? I froze. I froze like an animal about to be hit by a car. My limbs stopped moving. My inner monologue was still going rapid fire, and only now could I make out the words. How do I move my lips? Oh Lord, how does kissing work? Do I use tongue? Forget tongue. At that point, I started worrying about things that don't even happen in kissing, but I was freaking out so badly I couldn't even think straight. Do I use teeth? Do I need the blood of a spring chicken? When does the Pythagorean theorem come into play? Y'all, this is one of the best written first kiss scenes that I've ever read. I've been writing romance novels and novellas under my pen name. I've been doing that for the past 2 years, and I've been reading a ton of indie romance, so I have both read and written a lot of first kiss scenes. This one is excellent. The level of detail, the humor woven into the internal monologue, it's perfect, okay? I love it. And then on the next page, she says this. That night stacks up with so many other memories in the last 5 years that I never believed I'd experience. There are beautiful memories and hard soul-crushing moments and wonder and serendipity that can only be divine. I have changed and grown and been stretched beyond what I thought I could bear. In the wake of all these things, what I've discovered is that so many of my beliefs, so many of my capital T truths have fallen one after another like dominoes. In the absence of all I thought I knew were gaping holes. I've been afraid of changing because I built my life around you. Now you know why I cry so hard at Stevie Nicks concerts. I wrote in the margins, This would kill in a romance novel. The way she weaves the song lyrics back in, just like she did with Paul McCartney earlier, using it as a recurring motif to represent her emotional arc as the narrator, it's brilliant. The mix of physical details and internal monologue place me right there in the story with her, in her perspective. The Stevie Nicks quote brings the entire story full circle from something mentioned back in the beginning of the book, and it exemplifies Rachel as her character arc of overcoming fear. And then I thought back to page 22, back to the warrior fairies. I think it's safe to say that Rachel is absolute shit at writing nonfiction. It's boring, it's tired, it is, obsolete in 2025, okay? But you know what's not obsolete? Romantasy. I have friends who write in this genre and who make good money doing it. It's romance and fantasy combined. Think of books like A Court of Thorns and Roses, for example. Rachel straight up told us that she would rather be writing about warrior fairies and fantasy worlds, and it's one of the few times that I actually believed her. And later in the book, she showed us her ability to bring a first kiss to life on the page, woven in with the development of the narrator's arc. Rachel should be writing romance or fantasy, or more likely, romantasy. I don't know why she isn't, and that's when it hit me. Rachel is actually the target audience of her own book. Writing self-help books feels safe to her. Yes, she wrote fiction in the past, and it sold decently well, but when it comes to being a New York Times bestseller, making millions of dollars, self-help is where she actually really took off. And now she's too afraid to stray from it. Rachel, if I may, I think your Stevie Nicks reference has more than one meaning. Sure, it speaks to overcoming fear in favor of new relationships, but it does more than that. I think it speaks to the fears you're still trapping yourself in. I think you're still afraid of changes. You've been afraid of changing because you've built your life around the self-help genre. I know it's true. Stevie Nicks knows it's true. We all know it's true. You are a good writer and you seem passionate about the process of putting words together to bring a scene to life on the page. It's a passion that I, as a fellow writer, know very well. But the irony of it is, Rachel is the one who needs her own advice. Get out of the self-help industry, Rachel. It is a sinking ship. When I read this book, I flew through the stories that had those tangible details with visual and tactile imagery, but when I got to those believe in yourself, personal development is cool sections, I legitimately physically got a headache. I could not wait for those parts to be over so I could get back to the interesting writing. Rachel, you have a talent, you have a skill, and you have a passion, but you're playing it safe. You're pumping out this continued absolute crap, and you know why? Because you're afraid of changing, just like Stevie Nicks says. This is why, even though I will not send this video to Rachel, and I'm serious, if anyone in my audience sends this to her, I'm serious, you guys, I will be really upset at you. Please do not do that. I don't want to harass her or make her feel bad personally. Rachel, while I am critical of her writing, she is a human being with real feelings. I do not want to hurt her. But I guess there's a part of me that just kind of hopes she'll come across this video organically and just be willing to hear me out. That's very unlikely to happen, but a girl can dream, okay? I wonder if Rachel doesn't actually know that her career is sinking because she's still living in fear. Like, in reality, she could have a small devoted audience of romantasy readers who constantly look forward to her next spicy, steamy warrior fairy romance. I'd read the shit out of it. And I have to admit, after page 135, I just straight up stopped reading the book. I saw what was happening. I wanted no part of it anymore. I finished the book with that kiss anecdote and got to the Stevie Nicks reference. That's when everything came together for me. I knew what this review was really going to be about, and I didn't care to read any more of the law of attraction bullshit that she wanted to bore me with. Rachel, girl, write some fiction. Do it under a pen name if you want to experiment without fear of judgment from your existing audience. That's what I did. That's what I still do. I just genuinely hope that the next book of Rachel's that I end up reviewing is a fiction book. Maybe in the end, I could be the self-help guru who ends up pushing Rachel outside of her comfort zone through putting this video and its vibrations out into the universe. Wouldn't that be a funny turn of events? Or maybe not. Maybe that would never happen. It's the 2020s. If the 2020s have shown us anything, it's that the world is weird and unpredictable and we never know what's going to happen next. But I want to know what your guys' thoughts on this book are as well. The next video I'm going to be putting out is a review of Sherry Frankie's book, Sherry Frankie from the 8 Passengers family vlog, her mother Ruby is now in prison. I am currently listening to that on audiobook and I'm going to review that as my next review. But don't forget to subscribe to this channel because once I hit 100,000 subscribers, I'm going to start working on a review of After by Anna Todd. So if you want to see some unhinged, adapted Harry Styles fanfiction that got published, then the subscribe button is where you want to be. I will see you guys again soon for more videos, but in the meantime, don't be afraid of changing. Take that risk, write that book you want to write, make yourself happy, and follow your passion, all right? Bye, friends.